November 19, 1942. The frozen winds of the Russian steppe carried with them the sound of thunder. Not from the sky, but from the earth itself. Soviet armies surged forward from the north and south in a perfectly coordinated assault. Within hours, the steel trap had closed. 364,000 men of the German Sixth Army were surrounded at Stalingrad. There was no escape, no retreat. The once victorious German juggernaut was now trapped in the ruins of the very city it had sworn to conquer. At Luftwaffe headquarters, the phone rang. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, Hitler's chosen architect of air power, barked an impossible order to one man: supply the trapped army by air. That man was Generalfeldmarschall Wolfram Freiherr von Richthofen, a name that carried both brilliance and burden, a man who understood the science of flight, not as a romantic dream, but as a precise equation, and who would soon be forced to test the limits of reason against madness. When Richthofen heard the order, he reportedly muttered only one phrase, a phrase his staff would remember for the rest of their lives. Impossible, even to imagine such a thing. But in Hitler's Germany, impossibility was no excuse. To understand what this order truly meant, we must understand the man who received it. Wolfram von Richthofen was no ordinary general. Born into Prussian nobility in 1895, he was a cousin of the famed Red Baron, Manfred von Richthofen. But unlike his legendary cousin, Wolfram wasn't fascinated by duels in the sky or personal glory. He was an engineer, a thinker, a man of mathematics and structure. After World War I, he studied aeronautical engineering at the Technical University of Berlin, earning a doctorate in 1929. His dissertation was a classified study on the mass production of all-metal aircraft, a vision decades ahead of its time. While Germany licked its wounds under the Treaty of Versailles, Richthofen joined a secret circle of officers rebuilding the Luftwaffe in the shadows. He didn't chase medals, he built systems. He didn't write speeches, he drew blueprints. By the mid-1930s, as Hitler openly defied Versailles, Richthofen became one of the architects of the new German Air Force. He saw air power not as art, but as logic. Each flight, each bomb, each mission, a formula of physics, probability, and purpose. When the Spanish Civil War erupted in 1936, he commanded units of the infamous Condor Legion. It was here, over the skies of Spain, that he learned the devastating synergy between bombers and tanks, between sky and ground. His air campaigns at Guernica and beyond turned cities into laboratories for modern war. By 1939, as Germany invaded Poland, Richthofen commanded the 8th Fliegerkorps, the spear point of Blitzkrieg. His methods were ruthless, but efficient. He didn't see cities, he saw objectives. Warsaw, Rotterdam, London, each reduced to coordinates and tonnage. Yet beneath the steel logic of his methods, there remained a faint awareness that the machine he had perfected might one day consume itself. By 1942, Richthofen had become one of Hitler's most capable generals, brilliant, direct, unafraid to challenge incompetence. He was respected by peers and feared by subordinates. Even those who despised the Nazi regime admitted, when Richthofen spoke, people listened. That was about to change. Summer 1942, Hitler launched Operation Blue, a vast offensive toward the Caucasus. Its goal, capture the Soviet oil fields that powered the Red Army. Without oil, Hitler believed, the Soviets would collapse. The city of Stalingrad on the Volga River was never meant to be the main objective. It was merely a name on a map, until Hitler fixated on it. To him, Stalingrad wasn't just a city. It was a symbol, a duel between Führer and Stalin. And so, an entire army was dragged into a battle it didn't need to fight. By late summer, the German Sixth Army under General Friedrich Paulus reached the outskirts of Stalingrad. Richthofen's bombers led the way. 2,000 sorties in a single day. Firestorms engulfed the city. An estimated 40,000 civilians died in hours. But instead of breaking Soviet resistance, the bombardment created a fortress of rubble. Every crater, every ruined wall became cover for Soviet defenders. The Luftwaffe had turned the city into its own worst enemy. Richthofen saw it clearly. In his diary, he wrote, "The Russians are sending in reinforcements from all directions." He urged Paulus to act quickly, to take the city before the Soviets could regroup. But Hitler's obsession slowed every decision. Richthofen, the man of calculation, could only watch the numbers turn against him. Then came November. German intelligence detected heavy Soviet movements north and south of the city. The warning signs were everywhere. Reconnaissance flights confirmed armored divisions massing beyond the Don River. Richthofen warned headquarters repeatedly, but Berlin dismissed his reports. Hitler believed victory was certain. On the morning of November 19, 1942, the earth shook. Over 1 million Soviet soldiers surged forward in a double envelopment. Within 72 hours, the trap was sealed. 364,000 German troops, the Sixth Army and their allies, were surrounded. Inside the pocket, panic spread. Radio messages crackled with disbelief. Field commanders begged for permission to break out, to fight their way west before it was too late. Hitler's reply was one word: hold. He ordered them to stand fast, to fight where they stood. He promised relief would come from the air. At that moment, Hermann Göring, desperate to prove the Luftwaffe's worth, declared, "We can supply the Sixth Army by air. I give my word." Richthofen's reaction was immediate and cold. He calculated the numbers himself. The Sixth Army required at least 5,800 tons of supplies per day, 1,800 tons of rations, and 4,000 tons of fuel. The Luftwaffe's transport aircraft, primarily Junkers Ju-52s, could carry barely 1.5 tons each per sortie. Even if every available plane flew non-stop, even if the weather held, even if Soviet fighters stayed away, they could deliver perhaps 150 to 200 tons daily. It wasn't enough. Not even close. Richthofen went directly to Göring. He laid out the numbers, cold and clinical. He begged for reason, for permission to advise Hitler to authorize a breakout. Göring refused. He would not contradict the Führer. And so, mathematics was replaced by ideology. Logic was silenced by loyalty. And an entire army's fate was sealed by pride. November 24th, 1942, the Stalingrad airlift began. Richthofen threw himself into the operation with ruthless efficiency. He reorganized airfields, rerouted aircraft, reassigned squadrons, pushing the Luftwaffe to its absolute limit. Pilots flew in darkness, through storms, often without instruments, landing on frozen strips lit only by burning fuel drums. For a brief moment in December, the numbers improved. On December 7th, they delivered 362 tons. The operation's peak. But then, nature intervened. Temperatures plunged to minus 30 degrees Celsius. Winds howled across the steppe. Engines froze before takeoff. Ground crews used torches to thaw fuel lines, and Soviet Yak fighters patrolled the skies, waiting for the slow, lumbering Ju-52s. Richthofen's men performed miracles, but physics was merciless. The daily average fell below 100 tons. A drop of food here, a crate of ammunition there, barely enough to delay starvation. Inside the pocket, men were eating their horses, then belts, then nothing at all. Richthofen wrote in his diary, "It is impossible to accomplish. One cannot see how things will develop." They were not the words of despair. They were the words of a man watching arithmetic become death. By Christmas 1942, Soviet tanks had overrun the Tatsinskaya airfield, one of the Luftwaffe's main hubs. With its fall, the nearest operational bases were now 200 miles away. Doubling flight distance, doubling fuel use, halving delivery capacity. Richthofen knew what this meant. The airlift was collapsing. But still, the orders remained. Hold Stalingrad. The Sixth Army continued to die. By late December 1942, the illusion of hope had vanished. The Luftwaffe's mighty transport fleet was now a shadow of itself. Hundreds of aircraft lay scattered across the Russian steppe, burned, frozen, or buried beneath snow. Crews who had once flown with precision were now exhausted, frostbitten, and haunted by the faces of starving soldiers waiting below. Inside the ruins of Stalingrad, General Friedrich Paulus transmitted desperate radio messages to headquarters. "Our men are freezing, starving, dying. Immediate relief essential. Otherwise, the army will collapse." No response came. Berlin continued to broadcast the same message. "Hold your positions. Relief is coming." But relief never came. Every day, Richthofen's men flew into a storm of flak and ice to deliver what little they could: ammunition, bread, morphine, bandages. Every day, dozens of them never returned. Each flight into the pocket meant almost certain death. Each crate of supplies meant the sacrifice of another crew. Richthofen's staff officers began to realize what he already knew. They weren't sustaining the army. They were prolonging its agony. Still, Richthofen persisted, not because he believed in victory, but because duty demanded it. For a Prussian officer, obedience was sacred, even when it meant obeying madness. On December 24th, Soviet tanks overran Tatsinskaya, one of the Luftwaffe's most vital airfields. Ground crews fought desperately to evacuate planes under fire. Hundreds were destroyed on the ground. Pilots took off while enemy shells exploded around them. Many never reached altitude. When the smoke cleared, the Luftwaffe had lost nearly a quarter of its transport fleet in a single week. The airlift could no longer function. Deliveries plummeted from hundreds of tons to mere dozens. What little reached Stalingrad was fought over by starving men. Bullets traded for bread, bandages for cigarettes. The wounded froze where they lay. The dead were stacked like cordwood in the snow. In mid-January 1943, temperatures dropped below -40 degrees Celsius. Engines seized before takeoff. Fuel turned to slush. Parachutes froze solid in their packs. And still the radio orders repeated, "Hold Stalingrad." Hitler refused every plea to withdraw. He demanded that the Sixth Army fight to the last man, not because it made military sense, but because surrender, in his mind, was unthinkable. Richthofen wrote in his diary, his tone stripped of all emotion, "The Führer has decided that Stalingrad must be held. My reports are either not being read or not being believed." There was no anger in his words, only exhaustion. He was a man watching logic itself die. By late January, the Sixth Army ceased to exist as a fighting force. Men wandered through the ruins in silence, hollow-eyed, too weak to stand. The once proud Wehrmacht had become a ghost army. When Soviet troops finally stormed the last defensive pockets, Many German soldiers tried to surrender, but lacked the strength to raise their hands. On January 31st, 1943, General Paulus radioed his final message. The Sixth Army has performed its duty to the last breath and beyond. Long live Germany. Then he surrendered. Out of 364,000 men, only 91,000 survived to become prisoners. Barely 5,000 would ever return home. The airlift had lasted 72 days. It had delivered 8,350 tons of supplies, a fraction of what was needed. In return, the Luftwaffe lost 488 aircraft and over 1,000 airmen. It was not a military operation. It was a tragedy calculated in tonnage and blood. After Stalingrad, Richthofen withdrew into silence. He had done everything possible and failed, not because he was wrong, but because he had been right. His precise calculations, his warnings, his numbers, all dismissed by men intoxicated by ideology. And yet, in the bitter irony of totalitarian logic, Hitler rewarded him. 2 weeks after the surrender, on February 16, 1943, Wolfram von Richthofen was promoted to Generalfeldmarschall, the youngest in German history. He was honored not for success, but for obedience, for carrying out the impossible until it destroyed everything. In the months that followed, Richthofen continued to serve. He commanded Luftwaffe units in Italy, directed bombing raids in the Mediterranean, and watched as the war he had once helped design consumed itself. By 1944, he was exhausted, physically and spiritually. He suffered crippling headaches. Doctors discovered a malignant brain tumor. He was relieved of command in November, captured by Allied forces in 1945, and died in captivity on July 12. Only weeks after Germany's surrender, he was 49 years old. In the end, Wolfram von Richthofen's story is not one of heroism or villainy. It is a story of intelligence trapped in a machine that rewarded obedience over truth. He had seen the numbers, calculated the odds, and understood what others refused to admit, that ideology cannot defeat arithmetic and loyalty cannot rewrite physics. When he said, "It is impossible," he was not defying the Führer. He was describing the laws of nature. But in Hitler's Germany, even nature had to obey. The tragedy of Wolfram von Richthofen is not that he failed. It is that he was right. From the very beginning, as the snow melted over the ruins of Stalingrad, history recorded not just a military defeat, but a collapse of reason itself. In the war's aftermath, Richthofen's calculations became more than mere numbers. They became a warning, a reminder that truth ignored is tragedy invited. If you found this story powerful, subscribe and stay with us. Every week, we bring you untold stories of courage, conflict, and consequence, true tales from the darkest and brightest hours of history. Watch another documentary on your screen now, and step deeper into the world where history breathes, one story at a time.